Hello, everyone. It is Monday morning, and that's when I remind you that if you would like to support this ministry, you can go to the Patreon website, or you can go to ashajoy.com, and there's a donate button there. And also, my friend Ishani, who manages all of this for me, said if you would subscribe to Inner Life with Asha, which is my YouTube channel, somehow the YouTube gods are pleased if you do that, and they shower greater abundance upon us. And since this whole thing is about greater abundance, I had said to you before that it's not very intrusive if you subscribe. But I actually haven't the foggiest idea, to be honest. I've subscribed to a few other people's channels, music mostly, that I enjoy. And every so often somebody tells me that there's some new music to listen to. So I hope if you don't consider being told that there's something new for me to listen to, then it would be a benefit, and it would also help us, and it's effortless. So thank you very much. Now let's start with our prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, Divine Friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence within our hearts so that we move through this world with calm, quiet confidence, knowing that whatever we're doing, you are inspiring and guiding us, and that even when we falter or fail to live up to our highest ideals, your presence is unchanging within us, your love for us unconditional. We are your children. Guide us and bless us and bring us safely home to our eternal home in thy perfect love. Om peace. Amen. There's a little calendar that friends of ours, Prem Shanti and Om Prakash, that's his name, yes, Om Prakash. They make up for us every year, and they go into Autobiography of a Yogi, and they get 365 paragraphs to pull out, and you get to sort of turn the pages. It's a lovely free gift. Maybe they also sell it. I don't know, but I think it's a free gift, just informally printed on a gummy pad, Um, and one of them that appeared recently is an excerpt about Babaji, who's the deathless guru in the Himalayas, an ever living master. Amar, I think they call that when you're just ever living, you're eternal in it. Um, and But every so often he materializes for devotees for whatever reason. And in Autobiography, there's a story told about how after Lahiri Mahashaya met him in the Himalayas, Lahiri wanted to prove to some disbelieving friends of his that it had really happened and that Babaji was really there. So he prayed and Babaji appeared inside a closed room. So there was no way for him to have entered and so on. And then actually, as the whole story goes, Babaji says to Lahiri, I said I would come whenever you called me, but I didn't expect that you would call me for a trifle, which is try to prove to these unbelieving friends of yours that I'm really there. From now on, I will materialize and come to you whenever you need me. So even between the avatars, there was a little bit of a correction for our sake, really. But Babaji, even in that situation, said, now, but I don't want to embarrass you in front of your friends. So I'm going to, do exactly what you asked, which is I'm going to be with them. I'm going to show them that I'm really here. So many parts of that are so touching to me about how Babaji doesn't want to embarrass Lahiri in front of his friends. You said you could conjure me. So even though I think it was not an appropriate promise for you to make, I'm going to support you as a friend. When Swamiji was talking about the priorities of our life with Ananda, of our spiritual life, he talked about attunement to God, service to God, friendship, and was just like our friend, our loyalty to our friends is there. And actually, to be dharmic in all situations, friend came first, which always struck me. But I realized in reading this story, it's not that it was not dharmic for Lahiri to invite Babaji to come just to prove to his skeptical friends that it really happened, that he really had met this master. But the friendship was the first consideration. So even though Babaji even scolded Lahiri for doing this, even after he scolded him, but my friendship with you comes first. And then he even went so far as to ask ask them to make some halwa for him, because it's considered to be essential when a guest, and when any guest comes, but when a great soul comes, you want to offer them something, you want to feed them. The tradition of the wandering sadhu or the rishis who come, and they have no way of even supporting themselves or eating unless the society supports them. But also it's considered to be a great blessing for the person who does it, to be able to offer food to a highly advanced soul. So Babaji allows them to cook halwa. I believe he even asks for it. Cook halwa for me. And then he ate it with them. And partly to prove that he was really there, to show that he was, as much on this earth as they were, to give them the good karma of actually feeding him. All of these things came into play. All of these were the divine way of blessing us. And in this little excerpt that I was seeing, my friend also sent it to me to remind me. Um, it's just described in general terms that Babaji often allowed, even though he didn't need food, he lived on cosmic energy. I mean, he was able to sustain his body indefinitely, so he was completely outside physical laws, but he still allowed the devotees to feed him because it was good for them to do that. So his friendship to them transcended everything else. Babaji had nothing to prove. He could easily prove that he could live without food, so there was no sadhana involved for him. He was just there to serve. But that sweet personal way of serving, um, illustrated by Babaji, who's the most I mean, the state of consciousness of Babaji is not different than the state of consciousness of any self-realized master, any fully realized master, which includes Yogananda and Lahiri Mahashaya and Sri Yukteswar in our line of gurus, and Jesus, of course. So wait just a second, I lost the thought there. Oh, so his state of consciousness was not more than those other masters, but my, dramatic nature of his incarnation. Lahiri Mahashaya lived in the city of Varanasi and worked as a government accountant and raised a family and, did extracurricular things, organizing educational institutions and things like that. I mean, he did many wonderful things, but the context of his life was predictable and you want to say commonplace. The context was commonplace, accessible by many people. Babaji is the ever-living master who will retain his body throughout this entire cycle of creation, who lives somewhere in the Himalayas with a band of very advanced disciples and travels from peak to peak, sometimes by just saying, "Let us now pick up our staff and walk and move," and then um, the whole group just dematerializes and moves to another peak. It's pretty exciting. And it was when we were doing marketing and trying to understand how to present ourselves so that people would know who we are, and just sort of research, like, what do people look up on Google, that sort of thing. And Babaji is way up there. I mean, when you start with Kriya Yoga and Yogananda, Autobiography of a Yogi, but Babaji is as often or more often um, searched than any of the other topics. And when people read Autobiography of a Yogi, often they forget many, many aspects of it, but they rarely forget Babaji. And Babaji is the overarching father, the divine figure. Babaji simply means father, actually, respected, revered father, Baba. is Father. So um, he is the overarching, but people remember him more because he's unforgettable. Now, this all actually relates very closely to what I'm talking about today. But look how intimate Babaji's relationship is with the devotees. I need some halwa. Make some halwa for me. It's a sweet made out of flour and sugar and butter. There's a recipe for it in Swami's Art and Science of Raja Yoga. And I used to cook that recipe for Swami Kriyananda a lot, and I would cook it for him at the drop of a hat because it was also my favorite dessert. So it wasn't entirely altruistic that I would suggest that perhaps he would like some halwa. But so I know exactly what it is. So when I think of some Indian woman in the kitchen cooking it for Babaji, I know exactly what she would be doing. Okay. But it's the intimacy. I mean, having said all of that about what Babaji was like, and there's also a line in the autobiography of a yogi, whoever says the name of Babaji with devotion attracts to himself an instant blessing. And that's really something to think about. And it is fundamental, as Swami explains in the little book that we're following, because the chapters we're on, even though I'm not reading them, is, you are part of a greater reality and you are part of an intelligent reality. And Swami's writing this book for a broad audience. He actually even uses J. Donald Walters as the author's name with Kriyananda in parentheses, because he's really just wanting anybody to study this. So he approaches the question of God as if it were not the given. He sort of builds up into it, but without having to, do all those fancy dance steps. The premise that Swamiji is now trying to put out to us in the progression of our understanding of money, which is the outline I'm following, is that we're not alone. And he says very simply, those who feel that they are the sole power and they have to struggle against a hostile universe to just carve out their little piece of it. He said, you can generate enough energy to make some progress in that way. You might even succeed a little bit. But where magnetism comes from is when we understand that we are part of a greater reality. This is a line in the sand in terms of ever expanding awareness. When I have tried over many years, because I've been in a position of not only having to present these teachings, but to do what I could to attract people to be interested in these teachings. And I mentioned we sort of tried to find out what words that are intimately related to our path are most often searched by Google, and therefore what are the most recognizable elements that we could just put in front of people so that they would know that Ananda is a place where they could learn more about something they already have a modest interest in it. In fact, for a period of time when paper was the way that publicity was distributed, we had a quarterly program guide, and for a time we had a picture of Master and a picture of Babaji on that cover, just because people literally would walk by on the street and decide whether to stop and take our free literature or not. So we had a picture of Babaji. I never did any research to know exactly what worked, but it also was gratifying to us. Although you should never do publicity because you like it. That's just absolute death to your project. But one of the demographic characteristics, again, not from market research, but from experience, was that you begin to, people who come to Ananda have begun to understand that they're part of something bigger. Sometimes that comes to them as a surprise. People do come in, as one wonderful man who eventually became a very devoted central member of Ananda said, I just came to the meditation class to dump a little stress, is how he put it. And unfortunately, what happened for him, fortunately or unfortunately, is he discovered he was the disciple of a great master. So it's not like a person always knows. But somewhere in that process, one has an intuitive sense. And Swamiji talks in the Money Magnetism book about the nature of what is, about the nature of truth. And there were some very popular books. I think they've lost popularity now because I have friends who are young enough to be my grandchildren, which is I'm two generations away from me. I've become very conscious about cultural icons because they often present to me, they'll just mention it's just like so and so, and what the analogy that they're trying to draw with something I'm supposed to be familiar with is a total mystery to me. I have no idea what they're referring to. We have to go back to the beginning. So what was meant to be a verbal shortcut ends up being a huge shortcut, a long path into some, telling the old lady what's going on in the world today. But I get my revenge because I also can just put back, how can any educated, aware person not know about what I'm talking about? I think in one of these broadcasts, I used the word Perry Mason once. And one of my grandsons, so to speak, generational grandsons, just like, who in the heck is Perry Mason? How could you not know? Weren't you a child in the 50s watching a black and white television show? No, actually, I wasn't. I was in the astral world, or maybe I was your mother. I mean, what do I know? It's just like completely different. So one of those is this author named Ayn Rand, who wrote these books, and she was very popular. She even became a sort of a cult leader, and even now, people of my generation still know it's a very I let me just how to say it. It's a very individualistic philosophy of life, and it went over into politics and economics. And she wrote these strong books. Some of them, I read a few of them. They're well written and they're good stories, but they also have a philosophical point. And the philosophical point is the strong man or the strong woman determines them for themselves what reality is and lives according to what they know. And so Swami references it in there because he's my father. So, and we keep going many generations up. Not my spiritual father, not my literal father, not my earthly father. Um, but her philosophy was really very much that you declare your own reality. And Swami then has to really make a very careful distinction between truth and opinion. And you can even have an extremely well worked out personal philosophy. And if you have enough magnetism, enough energy, and enough willpower, you can actually also impose that self declared philosophy on the world. This was the theme of her novels. Of course, they were novels, but they actually, which means that word translates into the word fiction. But sometimes, art is truer than life. So it's not like there wasn't something there to think about. But whether or not it actually can be worked or not is a whole different question. And it can be worked. It can be worked to a certain extent. And actually, that is part of the question that Swami ultimately comes to. Am I trying to work my philosophy on the world, or am I trying to understand from direct revelation what the nature of the world is? And we go through all these many different iterations of this. This is why it takes us such a long time. And there's another point here which has to be spoken, which is every stage of experimentation is a necessary learning. I mean, for the ego to rise to the point where it has enough ambition and enough willpower and enough discipline, even to be able to impose its will on the world, is a great step forward from the one who doesn't put out enough energy even to be a cause in his own tiny sphere. What to speak of really having a dynamic influence. But the difficulty is that if it's just an opinion, even if it's a very well worked out and very intelligent opinion, Swamiji took Ayn Rand's writing seriously, and somewhere there's a whole essay that he wrote on this subject. Several people that I've spoken to, I'm hoping someone will really take on this project, which is called The Collected Papers of Swami Kriyananda, because in addition to 140 books, there are, I'm sure, thousands of pages, not even just letters, which is one thing, but just essays and small writings that are just letters to the public, they're just everywhere. And with the concept of a website, this is me just advocating for this, but several of my friends are seriously considering this. This is like a decade-long project. But the concept of a website, it can all just be made available. You don't have to be able to print 10 volumes, although sometime that would be nice too. But in one of these, he took the trouble to write about it because it's intelligent enough that you think it's true. And much prosperity teaching is on that level. Stand up for yourself, take what's yours, and it's progressive. But the problem with it, because it's not based on the deepest truth, which is if you separate yourself out and try to take your advantage based entirely on your power, and even more profoundly, if you take it for yourself without regard of the impact you're having on the whole. In other words, if you think, as long as I get mine, it doesn't matter what happens to you, then you're not cooperating with truth. And now, of course, you have to put reincarnation into this story, but I'm assuming that. Eventually, you find that you lose everything. This is the Festival of Light. The bird, the allegory in the Festival of Light, which is our Sunday ritual that we do in Ananda, USA and Ananda, Europe, is about the soul's long journey away from its home in God and back to union with God. We're sent out on this divine mission. Be fruitful in the gifts that are given to you and expand and multiply them. And what you acquire, share with all, for you are a part of all that is. These are the words of the festival almost quoted. And the little bird, though, becomes exhilarated. The bird is a symbol of us, and he becomes exhilarated, but with the feeling of the power that's running through him, and the power even over other people, that's very exhilarating. And he begins to think, how foolish, these are his words, how foolish I would be to share my strength with anyone. What else is wisdom except to keep what is mine for myself? And thus the bird enters what's called the second stage, which is the revolt, which is, well, God. Maybe that's what you think, but here's what I think. And it says, and the bird continued in this path, even though repeatedly he lost everything he had. And you don't just lose money, you lose friends, you lose happiness, you lose health. Eventually you lose respect from other people. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. And then you come to the point where you start in the festival, you come to the point which is called the quest, which is you start saying, I've tried it my way. I wonder if there's an alternative. And then we begin to learn that we are part of a greater reality. And the origin point of wisdom begins to assert itself in a certain way. So Swami, when he's talking about money magnetism, not merely money acquisition, but money magnetism, the magnetism comes when we're cooperating with this greater reality. And he's quick to add, he said, all levels of fulfillment are contained in the highest level of fulfillment. As above, so below is the ancient expression. And that meaning that if we find our fulfillment according to the highest truth, all the other levels of fulfillment will also come to us. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that our concept of how they should be fulfilled will come to us. But it means that which we are deeper, that which our soul and our heart are really longing for on the deepest level, the true fulfillment, which is the word that we're looking for, will really come to us. So Swamiji has us, saying here, and I believe I quoted in one of these talks, something from a little guidepost aphorism that I heard. I used to tell God what I wanted from him, and then I started praying, God, what do you want from me? And so Swami is expressing to us that the highest level of magnetism is when we not try to operate as this little lone operator with Ayn Rand's, Superman idea, I stand up for myself no matter what, but just the opposite, which is where we instead of trying to make our wave of the ocean the biggest wave that can knock over most waves, Swami says, paradoxically, the lower our wave is in a certain sense, the closer we are to the whole of the ocean. And we may, in fact, then, again, just because no analogy is perfect, we may, in fact, stand out hugely in the eyes of the world because we are actually not standing out at all, but cooperating with the power of the divine. So, one of the fundamentals of true money magnetism, again, as opposed to just acquisition, is to be inwardly conscious of who am I in the greater scheme of things. I've told you all this story before in other contexts, but it's absolutely apt here. In 1989, I had a brief career as a corporate trainer because I had a friend who was the HR director at a local company, and she was able to get me into this company. But I wasn't allowed to speak about God ever because it was corporate policy. I couldn't. And I was a straw fire in the most exact sense of it. I flared rather brightly, and then I just burned out. And right in the middle of that, in October of 1989, the Loma Prieta earthquake happened here, which was the last big earthquake, so I guess we're due for another. And part of it was a piece of the Bay Bridge collapsed in on itself, and a number of people who happened to be on it at the time were killed, including the wife of a member of this, of an employee of this corporation. I don't think she was an employee, but she was his wife. And the whole corporation, it wasn't that large, was rattled because of this terrible thing that had happened. I mean, only a handful of people were killed, and there she was. So my friend calls me and wants me to come in and help them to feel more secure. They're just rattled. What should they do? I said, sure, I'd love to help. And that's my natural response. Oh dear, I said, I don't know how to make them feel confident unless I talk about that we are part of a greater reality. And she said, well, can't you just tell them to believe in themselves? No, I said, they could believe in themselves all they want to, but that bridge was still going to collapse on that woman because really our lives are not under our personal control, that we are part of a greater reality. There is a consciousness all around us. And then, as Swami says, it's an intelligent consciousness and it's also a loving consciousness. Now, that's pretty hard to understand when your employee's wife has just been crushed on the Bay Bridge. But I said, there's no truth I could tell people that doesn't cause us to step beyond ourselves into a greater reality. And that is a stage of personal development. So when you pick up a book, even though Kriyananda's in parentheses, it's by J. Donald Walters about money magnetism, how to attract what you need at the time you need it. In the earlier title, it was called How to Use Money for Your Own and Others' Highest Good. You have to have that thought in your mind somewhere. And if you can't accept that thought, then you're probably not listening anyway. But his methods are not the methods that are going to work. Now, I titled this The Law of Miracles, and I think I'm going to just hold that title, although I'm probably going to have to go to tomorrow, because the law of miracles is just the law, and the law meaning the way things are. That's why when she wanted me to give people faith in themselves as if that would protect them from unexpected death, that's just an opinion. It's not a revelation of actual truth. We look at things that happen that are inexplicable according to our tiny explanation, and we use the word miracle, but miracle just means we don't understand. It's a catchphrase to say something has happened that is beyond my direct experience, and so we think it's outside of my experience, but it's not outside of our potential to experience. And that's the path Swami's trying to take us down. And there's much more to say about it, and I will say it tomorrow. God bless you.